Hey everyone, for what feels like forever, we've been trying to figure out how to make online courses, actually good. Not just something you have to get through, but something genuinely engaging. Well, guess what? The research is in, and it looks like we finally have a blueprint. Let's get into it.
You know the feeling, right? You're staring at your screen, trying so hard to pay attention, but you just feel drained, not inspired. It's this universal struggle, and it really gets to the heart of a huge challenge for modern education.
And that leads us right to the big problem we're tackling today. How do we stop just, throwing lectures online and start designing an experience that actually works, something that keeps students coming back and works for everybody? And that is the exact question a huge research effort decided to answer. They weren't interested in just opinions or what feels right. They wanted cold, hard evidence. What can an instructor actually do to make a real, measurable difference for their students? What are these specific strategies? And here is the fantastic news. After digging through an absolute mountain of data, the researchers came back with some incredibly clear answers. It turns out there is a formula for success. And the best part, it's all backed by solid evidence. So here's the bottom line right up front. There's no single magic bullet. It's not one weird trick. It's all about a thoughtful, intentional mix of strategies. That idea of a deliberate mix is the main takeaway from the entire report, and it really frames everything else we're about to talk about. But you might be wondering, how can they be so sure? And that's a great question. So before we dive into what they found, let's just take a second to look at how they found it. Because the sheer scale of this research is what makes these findings so powerful. Get ready for this number, 126 million. That's how many academic papers they started with. It's just a mind-boggling number. That's how wide they cast the net to make sure they didn't miss a single thing. So how do you go from 126 million papers to a handful of answers? You use a funnel, just like this. They started with that massive search, then screened it way down to only studies about higher ed and engagement. From there, they pulled the key data out of the top 53. And finally, they built their entire report on the 40 absolute strongest studies. Talk about finding the signal in the noise. Okay, and when you look at what those final top-tier studies were actually about, a really clear picture starts to emerge. Look at this. The biggest categories: interaction and feedback, course design, collaborative learning. This is our first huge clue. It's all about people and structure. It's not necessarily about the fanciest new tech. All right, that leads us perfectly into our first big takeaway. Because let's be honest, there's this idea that if you just throw more cool videos or slick animations into a course, engagement will just happen, right? Well, the research says not so fast. The answer is actually really clear. Multimedia can be an amazing tool, but only if it has a specific job to do. When it's interactive, when it's tied directly to a learning goal, it's fantastic. But check this out. Two separate studies found that just adding multimedia for the sake of it, with no real teaching strategy behind it, had basically no impact at all. It proves that tech is the vehicle, it's not the destination. So if it's not just about the tech, then what is it about? Well, this brings us to what might be the single most important theme in all the research: building a real community. It turns out engagement is really all about human connection. A lot of the best studies kept coming back to this one idea, the community of inquiry framework. It sounds complicated, but it's really just three key ingredients. First, you have social presence. That's just feeling like you're there with other real people. Then there's cognitive presence. That's the aha moment when you build understanding together. And finally, teaching presence. That's the instructor steering the ship, designing and guiding the whole thing. The secret sauce? You absolutely need all three. Okay, so how do you actually do that? Well, the research is super specific here. It means giving students feedback that's quick and actually helps them improve. It means creating group projects that have a real point. It's about finding that sweet spot between live classes and flexible on-your-own-time work. And through it all, the instructor has to be actively building relationships, making sure every single student feels seen. Okay, so theory is one thing, but let's see what this looks like in the real world. I want to show you a case study where putting these exact principles into practice led to some absolutely game-changing results. This is where the blueprint really comes alive. So there was this incredible study back in 2020 at a community college with a really diverse group of students. And they didn't just tinker around the edges. They went for a full course redesign. And what were their main tools? First, gamification, to make things more interactive and fun. And second, proactive, supportive communication. They went out of their way to build that connection. And the results? Honestly, they were stunning. First off, student withdrawals dropped by 10%. Think about that. Fewer students were giving up and dropping out simply because they felt more supported and connected. That is a massive win.
But here's the part that really matters. They saw pass rates for minority students go up by 8.5%. This is so important. It shows that this wasn't just a rising tide lifts all boats situation. This was a targeted approach that created fairer, more equitable results for students.
And that right there is the proof in the pudding. When you design a course intentionally, when you tailor your strategies to be inclusive, you don't just make things a little better for everyone. You create pathways to success for all students, especially those who need that support the most. So let's pull it all together. After sifting through millions of papers and looking at real-world results, what's the final verdict? What's the take-home message here? It really comes down to 4 simple, powerful keys. 1. Design with purpose. Every piece of tech has to have a clear learning goal. 2. Build a community. You need that social, cognitive, and teaching presence. 3. Structure is your friend. Students need clear expectations and useful feedback. And 4. Tailor your approach. One size fits all is a recipe for failure. You have to design for the diverse students you actually have. And that really leaves us with one big final question. We have the blueprint. The research couldn't be clearer. So the question isn't what works anymore. The real question is, what's it going to take to make this the standard for every single student everywhere? How do we make sure everyone gets access to this kind of great online learning?